Hello and welcome everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Now, today uh, we are going to cover a particular topic in ancient history from the history optional perspective. Right now, this is one topic where students usually have a difficulty taking into account the various viewpoints that have been given by different sets of historians, and that is why I wanted to shed some clarity on this particular topic of ancient history for your optional course. Right now, the topic is why did the Harappan civilization disappear? Right now, I'm sure that all of you must be familiar with the Harappan civilization, when it existed, at in which part of the globe did it flourish, who were its contemporaries, what were the features of life within the Harappan civilization, what was its economic structure like, what was its social structure like, what kind of contacts it had with the outside world, right? Now, that we are not going to discuss, but a few details about the Harappan civilization are necessary if you are to appreciate the causes for the disappearance or the decline of the Harappan civilization. Now, the Harappan civilization was a Bronze Age civilization. That means it was in the company of certain other civilizations who also qualify as Bronze Age civilization, where bronze metallurgy was known and it was used on a wide scale, right? The other contemporary Bronze Age civilizations include the Mesopotamian civilization, Egyptian civilization, the Chinese civilization, and the Persian civilizations. Out of all of these Bronze Age civilizations, the Harappan civilization was the largest and the most populous. It had large, well planned cities. It had flourishing trade, long distance as well as regional and intra regional trade. The Harappans had their own script, and based on the frequency with which Harappan script specimens have been found from various artifacts, we can conclude that literacy within the Harappan civilization was quite high. The economic basis of the Harappan civilization was intensive agriculture. They had a very well developed agriculture, which was technologically, you can say, quite superior to the other contemporary cultures surrounding them. And the surplus created by this agriculture provided the economic foundations for such a large, well developed civilization to appear. They had a large agricultural surplus. Different sites of the Harappan civilization in the mature phase also give evidence of a remarkable degree of uniformity, cultural, economic, as well as political. For example, from almost all the Harappan sites, the same kind of seals with the same kind of inscriptions and images have been found across the Harappan civilization. Burned bricks were used for construction purposes, and more notably, the proportion and size of these bricks is uniform across the civilization. The Harappans had a systematized and standardized weight and measurement scale, right? So units of length, units of weight, they were all standardized across the Harappan civilization. So this leads us to conclude that the Harappan civilization was a singular whole, right? Where did the Harappan civilization flourish? Primarily in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent. Almost all of Pakistan, the Indian states of Punjab, Haryana, parts of western UP, Rajasthan, Gujarat, etc. They were within the cultural landscape of the Harappan civilization. Right? Now, from an archaeological point of view, the Harappan civilization's study may be divided into different stages, including the pre-Harappan age, the early Harappan age, the mature Harappan age, and the late Harappan age. Right? Now, we are able to do this distinction on the basis of the degree of urbanism. What is this urbanism? Now, the presence of an urban civilization comes with a few attendant features, such as a large agricultural surplus, a well developed network of trade, long distance as well as short distance trade, specialization of crafts production, high degree of literacy, widespread use of script, and large, well planned cities. Right? Now, during the pre-Harappan period, none of these features existed. That is why pre-Harappan, right? People during the pre-Harappan period were living in the Neolithic mode of life. Gradually, they transformed into the early Harappan phase, where some of the elements of urbanization to varying degrees began to appear. During the mature Harappan phase, this was the developed phase of the Harappan age, right? And all of the features of urbanism were well represented. And during the late Harappan period, the features of urbanization gradually declined and then ultimately disappeared. So, when we are talking about the decline of Harappan civilization, we are looking at its transformation from the mature Harappan to the late Harappan period. Right? I hope this much is clear to you. Now, when it comes to the time period of decline of the Harappan civilization, most historians agree that it started around 2200 BCE and lasted up to around 2000 BCE. In some of the other regions of the Harappan civilization, the end date stretches further, that is around 1800 BCE. This means that the process of decline was not uniform over space and time. Its pace as well as the features were variegated. They were very diverse, right? So the process of decline varied over space and time. This is something important that you need to keep in mind, that the process of decline of the Harappan civilization varied over space and time. It was not uniform. From some sites such as Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Rakhi Garhi, etc., you get a picture of gradual decline. Whereas from some other sites such as Kalibangan, and Banavali, etc., you get a picture of sudden disappearance. Now, the ideas of gradual decline and sudden disappearance are quite self-explanatory. Gradual decline indicating that the features of urbanism continued to deteriorate over a period of time, both qualitatively as well as quantitatively. Sudden disappearance means that a well-developed Harappan city suddenly became deserted, never to be reoccupied at the same level once again. Right? So from different sites, you get different pictures. Now the disappearance of such an extensive civilization would naturally create a lot of academic interest, resulting in a very hot and healthy debate regarding the causes of the decline of the Harappan civilization. Now, different historians have come up with their own theories and explanations for this process of decline. Now, one of those theories is with regards to an invasion by a group of warlike outsiders who the propounders of this theory have identified as the early Aryans. So one of them was that the cities of the Harappan civilization ended suddenly due to the invasion of Aryans. Another theory focuses upon certain cataclysmic events, certain natural calamities, such as massive floods and earthquakes. To explain the decline of the Harappan civilization. Another explanation has been put forward by some other historians who have initially argued that the very basis of the Harappan civilization were the large river systems which drained the area that was occupied by the Harappans, which was their line of sustenance. The shifting of the river courses, changes in the annual pattern, annual regime of water flow, etc., that led to the decline of the Harappan civilization. So, shifting of river courses causing water scarcity around the populous towns led to their desertion and finally decline. Another theory focuses upon the process of climate change, right? Caused by the onset of drier conditions in the northwestern portion of the subcontinent. So, the onset of drier conditions due to a multiplicity of factors was one of the other theories that was put forward. Another theory seeks to link the process of the decline of the Harappan civilization with the emerging ecological imbalance caused by the over exploitation of the natural resources. Now, this theory is quite straightforward. It says that each and every region has a certain carrying capacity. Now, gradually, the population of people as well as animals living within the Harappan civilization and their resource use patterns had become so extensive that the natural resources available within that region were no longer able to support it. Now, this ecological imbalance led to a sudden crash in the population. People were forced to migrate out. A large number of them perished as well. And finally, another set of historians have argued that the Harappan civilization, its prosperity, its wealth, as well as its power and status as a civilization, as an urban civilization, was sustained due to its long distance and extensive overseas trade. Right? The decline of this trade now ended the supply of you can say material that was required to sustain the civilization in its mature phase, and thus it caused the decline. So the decline of long distance trade was put forward by another set of historians to explain the decline of the Harappan civilization. Now let us look at these theories one by one. The theory of Aryan invasion was put forward by Ram Prasad Chand, but he later backtracked. However, it was elaborated upon by E. Mortimer Wheeler, who, on the basis of literary as well as archaeological evidence, has tried to suggest that the Harappan civilization was actually destroyed by invading Aryans. Now, what are the literary evidences. For that, we go to the earliest text of the Aryans, that is the Rig Veda. Now, the Rig Veda is a collection of hymns dedicated to various gods and goddesses. The most important of them was Indra. Now, one of the names by which the Rig Veda refers to Indra is Purandhar. That is the destroyer of forts. And back then, apart from the Harappans, there were no group of people who were constructing forts. Indra, who is celebrated in the Rig Veda as a destroyer of forts of the enemies of Aryans, was therefore definitely destroying the forts of the Harappans themselves. Right? Therefore, Mortimer Wheeler has connected the legends of the Rig Veda with the destruction of the Harappan civilization. Another literary reference comes from the Rig Veda. It mentions a place known as Hariyupriya, where non-Aryans such as Dasas and Dasyus used to live. Now, Dasas and Dasyus were group of non-Aryans according to the Rig Veda, and they were finally overcome by the Aryans through war. Right now, Hariyupriya phonetically sounds very similar to Harappa, and the description that has been given in the Rig Veda also makes it clear or makes a strong case for it being in fact Harappa. It is mentioned that it was located on the banks of the river Parushni, that is Ravi. Harappa is also located on the right bank of the river Ravi only, and therefore on the basis of such similarities, the Aryan invasion theory has been supported on the basis of literary evidence. On the basis of archaeological evidence, Mortimer Wheeler has pointed out that 37 groups of skeletons have been discovered from Mohenjo-daro, indicating that they died suddenly during the raids of some other people. Right? These people would have been the Aryans. Further, we also find that towards the end of the Harappan period of settlement at the site of Harappa, we have new fossil remains, new grave culture, as well as new pottery culture, which was not native to the Harappan civilization. This is known as the symmetry etch culture. Now, people of the symmetry etch culture at Harappa, they used to burn their dead instead of burying them. They used to collect the bones, charred bones, in a painted urn and then bury it. This was different from the traditional method of funeral, that is burial in a wooden coffin. So, this indicates that this was a new group of people who had come and occupied the site of Harappa after destroying the people living there. Once again, Aryan invasion. Further, you can say that geographically, in that region at that point of time, in the second millennia BC, there was no other group of people that was constructing forts. So if the Aryans were clashing with somebody who was living in the forts, it would have to have been the Harappans only. However, upon deeper investigation, it appears that Mortimer Wheeler's hypothesis is quite flimsy and open to criticism. Historians such as B.B. Lal, G.F. Dales, etc., they have criticized uh, Mortimer Wheeler's Aryan invasion theory. First of all, they have said that Rig Veda, which is undated, is not a very reliable source of information for establishing the historicity of the decline of the Harappan civilization. They have questioned the unreliability of the source itself. Secondly, they have argued that the 37 groups of skeletons found at Mohenjo-daro did not come from the same level. That means that these people died over different periods of time, not as a result of a single invasion. And finally, while most historians accept that the latest date of the decline of the Harappan civilization, especially at places such as Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, was around 1800 BCE, whereas Aryans did not begin arriving in India till 1500 BCE. Therefore, there is almost a 200 to 300-year gap between the late Harappans and the early Aryans. It is unlikely that these people came face to face with each other during the mature Harappan period. And lastly, the cemetery etch culture at Harappa appears after a sterile phase, a sterile level, which followed the last remnants of the late Harappan period. So there is a gap in occupation, indicating that the site of Harappa had been deserted for a long period before the occupants of the cemetery etch culture came and settled here. Right? What it means is that when you are conducting an excavation, you excavate the ground from top to bottom, and therefore different layers of settlements are unearthed one by one. Those closer to the surface were deposited recently. Those further away from the surface, those which are deeper, they are older. Now, what these historians, such as P.V. Kane, B.B. Lal, G.F. Dales, they have suggested is that while the cemetery etch culture, suppose it is over here, and the last remnants of the late Harappan culture at Harappa were here, there is one layer, entire layer, which shows no evidence of occupation at all. It is a completely sterile layer. So once again, there is a lengthy gap between these two levels of occupation. That means the people of the cemetery age culture and the late Harappan period did not have direct contact with each other. Therefore, the Aryan invasion theory to explain the decline of the Harappan civilization, that has largely been discarded. Now, another theory is that of natural disasters. to explain the decline of the Harappan civilization. Right? Here, two different methods have been suggested. One of intermittent flooding and the other of catastrophic flooding, which was induced by tectonic movements, violent earthquakes. Now, for both of these studies, the archaeologists have focused on the site of Mohenjo-daro, located in present-day Sindh along the banks of the river Indus. Right now, the people who have suggested intermittent flooding, they have said that Mohenjo-daro experienced several stages of flooding. That means in one particular year, there would be a massive flood, the entire settlement would be submerged, a lot of silt would be deposited, people would have been forced to migrate, forced to run away. Then the flood waters would recede, the people would return, they would level of the entire surface and then rebuild on top of the destroyed buildings. And this process took place at least thrice, right? This created a lot of strain on the people. It impoverished them progressively. By the end, they became tired and they did not have the energy to rebuild. Therefore, they migrated from Mohenjo-daro in large numbers. The ones supporting the idea of tectonically induced catastrophic flooding, they have suggested that the region of the Indus Valley is seismically unstable. That means earthquakes can happen over there quite frequently, and as a result of a violent earthquake sometime in the earlier 2nd century BCE, a huge bund was created, right? That means there was a sudden shift in the ground levels. One plate got, you can say, subducted under the other, and a natural bund was created. As a result of this, the Indus waters that were flowing from north to south, they started to inundate this whole region. And for several decades, this entire region around Mohenjo-daro was transformed into a huge lake. The settlement was completely destroyed. That it was catastrophic is also supported by the fact that the water level had increased by about 30 feet above the present day water level of that region, right? So silt deposits have been found from that high up as well. That means the entire location, the entire region would have to be deserted. All right. So these are the explanations regarding natural disaster theory. However, another historian, H.T. Lambrick, has criticized the theory regarding flooding, either intermittent or catastrophic. What has he suggested? That look, first of all, the Indus is not like any temporary stream. It is a massive glacial river where the water flow remains consistent throughout the entire year. And therefore, the volume of the water must have been so large that it could have easily breached any bunds that were created. So, massive volume of the Indus was sufficient to breach any natural bonds. Secondly, he has suggested that if such a band was actually created, then the Indus waters would have come and continued to flood this region. And with the waters would have come a large amount of silt. What would have happened to this silt? Silt deposition in the water channel would have made it parallel to the ground level, right? But instead, what do we get to see? That the water channel remains intact. That means it continues to be deeper than the surrounding land, and the silt deposition in fact takes place on the floodplains, not within the water channels. That is why the silt is found in the sites such as Mohenjo-daro and not within the water channel itself, right? And on the basis of this alternative point of view, H.T. Lambrick has given another theory, that of shifting river courses. Now, the Indus is a young river and it has a tendency to shift its course from time to time. And H.T. Lambrick has suggested that the Indus shifted its course roughly 30 kilometers to the east at the location where Mohenjo-daro was located. This resulted in water scarcity at Mohenjo-daro. As a result, the site was deserted, right? So, how do you explain the various levels of silt that have been deposited? He says that these were not caused due to the depositional activity of the rivers. Rather, these are aeolian deposits of silt caused by wind action from the surrounding region. The wind blew and brought large quantities of silt and sand to the structures of Mohenjo-daro and deposited it there. When the river shifted its course back towards Mohenjo-daro, the site was once again re-inhabited. It was rebuilt over the levels of silt, and this process repeated itself again and again, right? Now, this theory also has another criticism. What is that? That although it may be able to explain the desertion of Mohenjo-daro, it does not do anything to explain the decline of the extensive Harappan civilization as a whole. Right? And secondly, if the people of Mohenjo-daro were aware of the river behaving in such a way about the pattern of shifting and then shifting back, why would they have continued to rebuild at the same location? Why not permanently move to a new location and create a new city like Mohenjo-daro, right? Why was it rebuilt over and over again? So it cannot explain successive resettlements either, right? So that is the idea we get from this theory. Now, an alternative theory was suggested by some other archaeologists and historians, focusing upon the idea of ecological imbalance resulting in the disintegration of the Harappan civilization. This idea was suggested by historians such as George Foster Dales. Uh, he collected a lot of data regarding food production, fodder supply, and population. And on the basis of this data, he made certain calculations by adjusting for variations in technological development between modern times and the Harappan period. What did he try to calculate? He tried to calculate the carrying capacity of the region that was settled by the Harappans and the mismatch between this carrying capacity and the population that it was supporting, the animal as well as human population that it was supporting. Right? He said that there was a huge mismatch between the population and the carrying capacity of the Harappan civilization. Right? This resulted in a collapse of the population. Either many of the inhabitants perished due to food and water scarcity, or they were forced to migrate towards more productive regions. क्या कहा है इसने? He has argued that the semi-arid Indus Valley region was not ecologically capable of supporting a very extensive, a large population which was practicing intensive agriculture for more than 1,000 years. Very quickly, the rising food and fuel demands led to not only the clearing of forests but also the degradation of soils, right? And therefore, the population collapsed. Agriculture became less productive and people were forced to migrate. Now, this explanation seems quite plausible, but it also has a few weaknesses. One of them is that the entire North India, you can say, plain region is a living witness to the enduring fertility of soils. The soils of this region are considered to be the most fertile in the entire world, and that is why this region has been able to support the largest populations, historically speaking, throughout the entire phase of human history. Right? So, we cannot say that a sudden decline in the fertility of the soils resulted in the decline of the Harappan civilization. Secondly, even though the fertility of the soil in the Indus Valley region may have declined, but the fertility of the soils in the Gangetic Valley that still was continuing. So, what was stopping the Harappans from simply packing up and shifting eastwards? So, the fertility of the Ganga Valley remained high, and these are the weaknesses of Dale's theory. Now, the next theory is with regards to the growing aridity of the northwestern portion of the subcontinent. Initially, it was suggested that this growing aridity was caused due to drying up of the river systems that used to drain this area, specifically the Ghaggar Hakra river system. And that happened due to the process of river capture. Now, the Ghaggar Hakra river system is not glacier fed, it is rain fed. However, according to these historians who supported this particular theory, back then the Ghaggar Hakra river system had very important tributaries. These were glacial in origin, such as Satluj and the Yamuna. Now, the Ghaggar Hakra river system drained the regions of Punjab, Rajasthan, and Gujarat. However, sometime in the early second millennium BCE, due to violent earthquakes and tectonic movements, these rivers suddenly shifted their courses. Satluj became a part of the Indus River system. That means it was captured by the Indus River, and Yamuna became part of the Ganga river system. It was captured by the river Ganga. As a result, the Ghaggar Hakra river system was devoid of the headwaters that it was receiving from these glacial tributaries. It led to a decline in the availability of water and the gradual desertion of the sites which were situated along the Ghaggar Hakra river system. Right? Now, this idea was given by D.P. Agarwal and Sood along with others. Now, this particular theory is also open to criticism. The criticism is empirical in nature mostly. First of all, it has been pointed out that there is lack of sufficient research to suggest that this process of river capture actually ever took place, right? Secondly, Even if such a capture took place, it is uncertain at which particular point in history it did actually take place. Right now, there may be a possibility that the Satluj and Yamuna were captured by the Indus and Ganga respectively much before the decline set in. So then the process of river capture could not explain the decline of the Harappan civilization. So there are inconsistencies in dating of this entire period, right? Further, while some of the evidence points to the onset of drier climate in Rajasthan during this period. For example, there is one paleobotanist, Gurdeep Singh. He has conducted a research of the paleopollen founded around the lakes of Rajasthan, such as the Pushkar and Sambar lakes. And he has concluded that based on the availability of pollen that was discovered here during this entire period of decline around 1800 1700 BCE, that this region was now supporting trees which were habituated to a more arid climate than they used to be earlier. So this points towards the onset of drier climate. However, contradictory evidence comes from the Lunaksakar lakes around Lunaksanar lakes around Rajasthan. According to the evidence found from these lakes, it is clear that the onset of dry climate actually set in much before the purported period of decline. So, drier climate set in before the decline. Right now, regardless, it is clear that there was a drier climate around the period of decline. So this means that while this particular discovery points to the onset of drier climate during the period of decline of the Harappan civilization, a similar process had taken place earlier as well. This does not mean that around the period of decline of the Harappan civilization, drier climate did not set in. So that means in cycles, the climate of this region used to change, right? And that is where the most of the recent research is focused upon. Now, in association with this particular theory of decline, a new theory has been suggested quite recently, about a decade back, known as the monsoon link theory. Right. Now, this simply suggests that around 4000 BCE, the monsoon in the northwest portion of the subcontinent was extremely strong, or there was intense monsoon activity. This was not conducive for large civilizations to appear. It began to weaken around 3000 BCE. And the weaker monsoons created optimum conditions for large scale intensive agriculture as well as the development of a large urban civilization. And around 2000 BCE, it weakened further, and therefore the monsoonal pattern was now no longer able to support large scale agriculture or urban settlements, right? So the climatic range that within which such a civilization can exist had now been breached. So this is what this monsoon link theory has suggested. There is another theory, once again linked with monsoons, which points towards the eastward shift of the monsoons. Now, it was suggested that around 3500 to 2000 BC, the monsoons were strongest over this region, that is the northwest portion of the subcontinent. But from around 2000 BC onwards, the monsoons migrated towards the east, right? The rainfall that this region was receiving declined. Now, before this period, since the people living in this region were depending upon flood irrigation and rain-fed agriculture, they had not developed any kind of techniques of artificial irrigation. As a result, when rainfall became scanty, these settlements became deserted. Another theory which is based on a recent study by IIT Kharagpur Archaeological Survey of India. This was concluded a few years back, I think 2018 or 2020 में conclude हुआ है. Now, this says that there was disappearance of a rain-fed river which was irrigating the regions of Punjab, Rajasthan, and Gujarat. This is the mythological so-called Saraswati River, right? And never before was it suggested that in this region there was ever a glacial river. All of the existing literature points towards the existence of a rain-fed river system, a large one, but still a rain-fed one. And this particular theory suggests that this river used to originate in the Meghalaya plateau and flow westwards across the northern plains to drain in the run of Kutch region. That was the Saraswati River. Now, on the basis of the study of paleo channels, that means the ancient channels of rivers, the paleo channel of Saraswati has been identified, not across the northern plains, but in parts of the run of Kutch only. And it is also clear that around 2000 BCE, it suddenly disappeared due to reasons unknown, right? And as a result, the entire run of Kutch region and the surrounding region became quite arid. It was not able to support large populations any longer. All right. Then there is a further theory based on the study of analysis of marine cores and marine DNA. Now, drilling cores out of the Arabian Sea, just off the coast of present day Pakistan, they were collected by researchers and studied. Now, this is an anoxic environment where organic matter, dead or living, is preserved quite well for long periods of time. And on the basis of this, one thing has become clear, that around 2000 BCE, there was a definite change in the monsoon pattern. The summer monsoon became weaker and the winter monsoon became stronger. See, what happens is that when wind blows over the ocean surface, it acts upon the topmost layer of the ocean, right? That is dragged due to the frictional force applied by the wind. As a result, water from the lower levels rises up. This phenomena is known as upwelling. Geography में आप लोगों ने इसको cover किया होगा. And as the water rises, it brings nutrients from the sea bottom to the surface. As a result, in the sunlit region, sunlit layers of the ocean, various varieties of plant life can sustain themselves. Now, one thing became clear, that during the winters, there was a greater quantity of plant life that started to emerge from around 2000 BC. In comparison, during the summer season, because of the weakening monsoons, not enough upwelling was taking place. As a result, the plant biomass in the summer period started to decline, right? This had a direct impact on the situation in the land. Once again, the Harappan people were dependent upon the summer monsoons, and the summer monsoons had become weaker. Therefore, they started to desert the areas where agriculture was still dependent upon the summer monsoons. In the foothills, on the other hand, they continued to receive a healthy amount of rainfall. As a result, they began to migrate towards those regions and set up small hamlets, towns, or villages. Right? So, same theory है. The onset of drier climate, उसके लिए अलग-अलग explanations दिए हुए हैं. Right? And thus, this is a very good case study to understand how new and unique techniques, methods, and research pedagogies are being introduced into the study of history and archaeology. Right? Now, in conclusion, we can say that, see, the Harappan civilization was an extremely large and diversified civilization. Right? Now, one set of factors may have acted and contributed to the decline in one particular region, but none of these factors alone could explain the decline of the civilization as a whole. Therefore, multiple factors would have been responsible for the decline of the Harappan civilization. In different parts of the civilization, different combinations of factors would have been active. So they were acting, or different factors acted in combination with each other. Right. Another point to think about, to pay attention to, is the fact that all large societies, well developed societies, they are based upon a fragile balance between cultivators, craftsmen, traders, rulers, trading partners, and the communities located close by, uh, from where different materials may be obtained, which are critical for the survival and sustenance of this well developed civilization. And all these relationships are based on the ecological balance that exists between man, animal, and the environment. Now, if any facet of this relationship was to be adversely affected, then all other facets would become weaker. They would deteriorate both qualitatively and quantitatively. And one of the ways to understand the decline of the Harappan civilization was the disruption of this fragile balance. Right? So that is the idea over here. I hope you are getting the picture. Now, after this, another thing that we need to pay attention to was the idea of decline. What do we mean when we use the word decline? Is it the complete disappearance of the Harappan people, their way of life, their language, their script, their customs, their technology, or simply a decline of the urban phase? Right now, based on the explanations that we have seen, it becomes clear that what earlier was seen as a sudden disappearance, complete disappearance of the Harappan way of life, was in reality a decline of the urban features. So it was not complete disappearance, rather a decline in urbanism. Secondly, this process was also not sudden or universal. What happened was that in the core region of the Harappan civilization, that means the Indus Ghagra river system, as these conditions became unsuitable, people began to migrate and settle in other regions. That was known as the late Harappan period. So during the late Harappan period, new settlements emerged in new regions such as eastern Punjab, western UP, the Gujarat coast, Saurashtra region, and even Maharashtra, right? Another thing that we get to see is that although urban town planning disappeared, some other habits of the Harappans they continued. They continued to live in burnt brick houses, the use of script also continued, but it became rarer. The uniformity of weights and measures, the uniformity of seals, that also disappeared. But they continued to produce new kinds of seals, and representations of script are and graffiti are found from various artifacts. Further, the kind of artifactual integrity, uniformity that existed during the mature Harappan period will not be found, but that did not mean that the technical expertise and skill required to produce such artifacts that disappeared. There continued to be specialization of crafts, but they were no longer uniform. They were regional. Right? Urban settlements continued, but they became rarer and smaller in size. There was a movement towards ruralization. Right? The pottery also saw transformation. It also showed the elements of change and continuity. While some of the kinds of pots that were made during the Harappan period, they went out of fashion. That means they were no longer found. Some other types continued. Further, the technology for making pots also became more variegated. So it became regional or diversified. Irrigated agriculture continued, and in fact, agriculture became more diversified. As the Harappans who were moving into new locations, they came into contact with the Chalcolithic communities who were also living there. So they absorbed some of the traditional agricultural knowledge of those communities, and they also came up with new innovations to overcome the challenges to agriculture posed by their new habitat. Right. So things such as multiple cropping emerged, that is summer and winter crops, plowed agriculture using wooden plows that continued. Rice seems to have become the staple crop during the late Harappan period. Wheat, barley, etc., they also continued. And while earlier the large agricultural surplus was going towards the supporting of an urban environment, now localization of the surplus started to take place. Therefore, we see the pattern of the emergence of agro-pastoral communities with their own settlements in different parts of the Indian subcontinent. Right? So these were the ways in which a transformation took place. Another idea which is associated with the decline of the Harappan civilization is the idea of continuity. Had the Harappan civilization declined and disappeared suddenly, would any element of continuity exist? No. But on the other hand, we see that such continuity continued to exist, both in the spiritual and religious field as well as the material field. In the spiritual or religious field, what are the elements of continuity you can identify? The legend of Pashupati, which is quite similar to that of Shiva, the worship of the mother goddess. In several parts of the subcontinent, even now, people worship the earth mother or Shakambri. The fertility cult of the Harappans finds continuity in the linga and yoni images and worship around them, around these cults across parts of India. Further, fire worship, water worship, which were part of the religious life of the Harappans, that continues in India even today. Fire and water cult. The concept of ritual bathing and holy baths is still dominant within the Indian society. Further, the idea of sacrifice, it was present in the Harappan civilization. It was also a major part of the Aryan culture. Further, the use of talismans and amulets, the belief in magic, charms, and spells, we find both in the Harappan civilization as well as the present society. When it comes to the material culture, we have several other elements of continuity, such as the use of burnt bricks for construction, the variety of crops and cropping technique, the use of cotton, the kind of clothes or the fashion sense that also percolated through the ages. For example, during the Harappan civilization, people wore a lower garment made of cotton known as dhoti, an upper garment like a shawl covering one of the shoulders. Similar Buddhist images have also been found. Further, we have the hexadecimal numeral system. Right. Uh, the numeral system of the Harappans was not binary or decimal in nature, it was hexadecimal in degrees of 16. The same feature continues in India even today. For example, 1 rupee has 16 annas. Several other examples are also present. Right. Now, apart from this, some other things you can identify: the house planning, for example, right? Traditional Indian homes are still constructed in the same way in which Harappans used to make their homes. That means in the middle of the house there would be an open courtyard, and surrounding that courtyard there would be several rooms. The Harappans also had separate bathrooms and toilets. This is a feature that you will still find in the rural context in different parts of India. The Harappans had mastered the art of metallurgy. They made beautiful sculptural pieces using the lost wax technique. This technique is still in use in India today in different parts of India, right? The Harappans made elaborate arrangements for the availability of drinking and bathing water inside the house, indicating that they were quite concerned about personal hygiene. Now, Indians, even today, have also inherited the same sensibilities towards personal hygiene, same concern towards personal hygiene. Therefore, it would be incorrect to say that the Harappan way of life disappeared entirely. In fact, it has seeped down through the ages from the Harappan period to the present. And in this context, the late Harappan period should no longer be viewed as a period of decline. Rather, it should simply be viewed as a period of transformation and transmission. Now, transformation, we have already seen the features. What were the new features that became visible, right? So, it was a decline in urbanism, new regions became populated, some of the old techniques continued, some were discontinued, some features continued, some new features emerged. Right. So that were the features of the Harappan period, how it, or late Harappan period, how it represented a period of change, a period of transformation, ruralized, regionalized society as compared to uniform and urbanized civilization. Transmission of the Harappan way of life also took place during the late Harappan period, and two parallel processes were responsible for it. Right? एक process क्या था? That the Harappan literary tradition, who would have been in charge of maintaining it? The priestly class, which would also be responsible for maintaining the religious tradition. Was incorporated into the Aryan culture. Now, when the Aryans first arrived in India, they did not have any extant literary tradition, they did not have any script. So, it seems that they developed their script after the priestly class of the Harappan civilization was incorporated into the Aryan society. And some of the religious traditions and practices of the Harappans were also integrated into the Aryan civilization, into the Aryan religion. parallel process was going on from below. The diffusion of Harappan culture had taken place as the Harappans during the late Harappan period came into increasing contact with the Chalcolithic communities, right? Now, they had diffused among the Chalcolithic people, they lived alongside them in harmony and also with competition, right? So, there was an interchange of values and interchange of practices. Right? When the Aryan culture began to expand, the Chalcolithic communities were gradually integrated within it. So the Chalcolithic communities, which had now become repositories of the Harappan culture, came into direct contact with the Aryan culture. So contact between the Aryan culture and Chalcolithic cultures also led to this transmission of technical as well as material and spiritual knowledge and information. Then another repository for the Harappan culture became the relatively isolated tribal communities of India. Once the Harappan culture began to diffuse, it went not only to the Chalcolithic people but also to the tribal people. Once again, there was an interchange of ideas and practices, and some of those ideas of the Harappan period have been kept alive by the tribal people, such as the Gondi script, which is quite similar to the Harappan script, although the Harappan script has not been deciphered. The traditions of mother goddess, idol worship, construction of shrines, animal sacrifice, etc. These are also some of the important features of tribal religion, right? So, in this way, transmission and you can say percolation of the Harappan way of life continued to take place. So we have understood the elements of continuity as well as the medium of transmission, right? So suppose there is a question: how well does the Aryan invasion theory explain the decline of the Harappan civilization? Word limit is 200. How are you going to craft your answer? First of all, you have to give a brief picture of Harappan decline, including the time period and the resulting change, that is, the disappearance of Harappan cities and the attendant features of Harappan urbanization. This is going to be your introduction. Then you are going to divide your body into different parts. In the first part of your body, you are going to establish the position of the Aryan invasion theory. Explain the Aryan invasion theory regarding the decline of the Harappan civilization. Second, you are going to present the supporting evidence Third, after having done both of this, you are going to present the criticism. And having refuted the Aryan invasion theory, you are going to offer plausible alternatives. Right? Now, obviously, you will not be able to detail all of the theories. Rather, you will focus on the idea that the Harappan civilization was a large and diverse civilization which was based upon a fragile balance of very tenuous relationships. Now, if any crisis or imbalance emerged, then the health of the entire civilization, this entire system would be threatened. And this is probably what happened. There may have been an ecological imbalance. The health of the Harappan civilization may have suffered due to the decline of overseas trade, or it may have been the result of certain natural disasters or onset of drier conditions. Right? So that is how you are going to conclude. Once again, you will clearly indicate that the Aryan invasion theory has largely been refuted by most modern scholars. Right? So these are the kinds of questions you can expect. Another possible question may be that highlight the elements of continuity between the Harappan civilization and the modern society, both spiritual as well as non-spiritual, right? Or you may be asked the same question in a different manner, saying that the uh, elements of continuity of the Harappan civilization are not simply spiritual, they are much larger in their context. Examine or analyze the statement, right? So that is another possible question. Or you may be asked to throw light on some other aspect of the Harappan process of decline. What does the idea of decline mean? What was the extent of decline? To what degree the decline affected the Harappan people and the Harappan way of life, right? So these are the possible questions that might emerge out of this particular topic. All right then. I'm ending this session right now. I hope you learned something. And the purpose of this session was just to give you an idea of how in our history optional course we are going to deal with each of these topics. Of course, today I have just given a brief overview. I have not gone into the details, but during our proper course, we are going to look at each of these aspects in greater detail with a lot more information and names of sites, names of historians. These are going to be emphasized upon. A few more questions are going to be discussed in your proper foundation course. All right. So that is it from my side for today. Thank you very much. I'll be seeing you very soon with another session.